Good afternoon. My name is Jared. I am the Student Data Resource Manager at the OPI. It is 2:30 and we've got a lot to cover today, so I'm going to jump right in and get started. This webinar today is covering the AIM beginning of year verification process and what that entails. Excuse me. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, don't hesitate to interrupt me. You can jump right in and unmute yourself to ask questions, or you can use the chat feature to type in questions if you want to do it that way. The webinar is being recorded so that it can be viewed later on the OPI AIM website, which I have up here. And the webinars tab below in green is where you'll find this webinar posted most likely tomorrow. Be at the top of this list, and you'll see the previous webinars I've hosted for this year so far in order there. To the left, we have the webinar schedule for the full year, and you'll see all the upcoming webinars. We've done these 3 so far, and right now today we are doing beginning of year verification. Next week, we are going to do student photo repository guide, and that's taking place next Tuesday. It's the only one for the rest of the year that's taking place on a Tuesday instead of a Thursday. If you haven't already contacted me to get your information updated in my contacts database for AIM primary or backup contacts, submit this form here to do that. And you could also subscribe to the emails here to make sure that you receive our AIM bulletins, which is where you will find these Zoom links for these webinars in the bulletins. Okay, I'm going to jump in now to the beginning of year verification process AIM user guide, which is located under the red tab for AIM user guides. And at the top here, there's a bar that's AIM user guides by collections schedule. And it says here, beginning of year, there's this grouping of beginning of year guides. We're going to look at these first 3, just these first 3 guides here. We will later look at these other guides. But right now we're looking at just calendars and enrollments to make sure that all that stuff is set up correctly. All right, the beginning of the year verification process establishes calendars and enrollments for the new school year. Your calendars should be already set up for this 21-22 school year if you have done the end of year process from last year. The end of year process is the process of establishing your calendars for this year, so that way you have it ready to go to put your enrollments in. If you haven't done that, go to the AIM webinars tab and you can watch the webinar under the 2021 recorded webinars for end of year enrollment process. That will show you how to set up calendars. We also have the user guide that is associated with that collection under AIM user guides. And go to user guides by collection schedule and go to the end here for the end of year collection and go to the end of year enrollment process user guide. That user guide will walk you through setting up calendars if you do not have them set up already. So we're going to look at that, make sure your calendars are set up, and then we're going to check enrollments to see if those were rolled forward correctly and or entered correctly for this new year. I'm going to look at 2 other user guides that I mentioned that are going to be utilized throughout the collection schedule process for the whole school year. This user guide, for example, combines all of your Montana Youth Challenge, Job Corps, MTDA enrollments into one user guide for A and B funding, which is not done until the fall or spring count. However, this user guide also provides you information for enrolling those students. So you can use this guide throughout the year to make sure your enrollments are up to date for those program students. And then during the certain counts to do the A and B counting for those specific students. This other user guide, which is new as well, is extracurricular activities for non-public or homeschooled students. And I'll cover that at the end of this webinar in more detail. But again, this is used throughout the year to establish enrollments for these students, which can occur at any time of the year. But at the beginning of this year, and for this webinar's purpose, I'm pointing it out so that you have a separate calendar set up for this, for these enrollments, because they will be outside of your academic calendars. So you essentially will have two calendars if you participate in this program. And I'll get more into that in a little bit. This note here about Senate Bill 72 allows for those non-public and homeschool students to participate in extracurricular activities. And that is what that user guide is about. And this beginning of the year process guide directs you to use that user guide to set up calendars, etc., if you need to. This was not available at the end of year process last year, so it's brand new. It's just been implemented. And so if you decide to add calendars for that, you're going to go to that user guide to do that. All right, so we have our table of contents and then frequently asked questions. How do I properly exit students who transferred over the summer? We're going to look at page 4 for that. How do I properly exit students who did not return after summer? We're going to look at page 4. How do I record summer graduates? We're going to look at page 5 for that in detail. If I use the Montana edition of Infinite Campus, how do I get state IDs? We're going to look at that at page 7. I'll go through that in detail. What are the correct enrollment start status codes for students? You want to see Appendix A for enrollment start statuses, which can be found by clicking that link in the user guide, but also going to the AIM user guides page and going to code definition appendices, and you'll see there Appendix A. Which enrollment service type do I choose? On page 6, I'm going to cover enrollment service types. How do I verify enrollment data I have entered? We're going to look at reports on page 9. And how do I know the data is correct? After performing a resync, you can use verification reports to compare your data to make sure it's accurate. Here's your data checklist for this particular user guide. Again, once your calendars are set up for the 21-22 school year, you're going to check to make sure that these things are done. You're going to modify, down there, I clicked that link by accident, this link here. You're going to modify previous students' enrollments for summer transfers if they need that done, previous years for summer graduates, get those new state IDs assigned for any new students that are enrolling in your district or school. Request records for transfers if they have not been done so for new students. You're going to put any end dates for any AIM Infinite Campus staff in your school or district who have left over the summer. You want to disable their accounts and put end dates in there so that they do not have access to Infinite Campus any longer. To prepare for the fall count, confirm that American Indian students are identified. And you can do that with this enrollment summary report here. Verify all students have enrollment, no overlaps, and that can be done with these various reports here. Index student information and reports. There's several reports: duplicate IDs, enrollment status, enrollment summary, and then there's the state enrollment verification and state enrollment overlap report that we ask you to run to see that there's no overlapping enrollments between schools and districts in the state. If there are, contact that district to clear that up. It's usually a day overlapping. Maybe it's the end date was wrong or the student was never end dated for last year perhaps. So work that out amongst yourselves, call the district and find out why a date is wrong perhaps in the enrollment for last year. And then there's ad hocs that you can use to check your data afterward. These Montana Edition upload templates are the 2 required templates for Montana Edition users. District Edition users are the users of Infinite Campus who utilize the full service features. So they have, they take attendance in campus, they can do everything, transcripts, whatever they need to. They have campus support to help them. They do not worry about these templates. Montana Edition users have a third-party system like Q or Power School, where they maintain their student data. That data is then extracted, imported into their Montana edition version of Infinite Campus, and then it's synced to the state. So this is provided to those schools for free by the state. It's a limited edition version of Campus. It has limited features, limited capabilities. It is literally just there so that they can get the data to the state from their other systems. And they need these templates to do that, depending on how large the school is. All right, jumping into enrollment verification. So before anything is changed, or if you want to look at your data before you start adding enrollments, et cetera, changing enrollments, you can run this report to have a bird's eye view of what your enrollments are currently looking like in the 21-22 school year. Because if you have done last year's process of creating your calendars, that same user guide, the end of year process collection, shows you how to enroll your students into the new calendar in mass. So if you haven't done that, you can do that. Or if you do not like doing that, you can individually enroll students one by one. That's fine too. Whatever your preference, after you get the enrollments in there for the current year, you want to look at the data and make sure it's accurate. So you go to index inside Infinite Campus, student information, reports, and then you want to select this enrollment summary detail report. And then you customize the report. Put the enrollment start date as of the first day of instruction this year. Select the grades that you want to look at, your service types you want to look at, select the calendars you want to look at. If you've got one, select it. If you've got 10, select them all. Select the start status types you want to look at. Select your format, PDF or CVS file, and then generate the report. And that'll give you a printout, and you can look at every single enrollment you have for this year without having to navigate through Campus in each enrollment one by one. You can look at it on paper if you want. So I'm going to go into Campus here and go to Index under toolbar here, and then go to Student Information, go down to Reports, and then we're going to go to Enrollment Summary Detail. So you enter that effective enrollment date, so the first day of instruction for this year. Select your calendars. If you want to just look at one school or all of them, you can. Select all the service types you want to look at. And you can pick start statuses, end statuses. If you want to see them all, select all. If you want to just look at transfer students, select that start status, that's fine. And then click next. And there's going to be a couple more things you can customize. You can decide what features you want in the report, such as name, gender, student number, grade, and then format it into whatever format you want, PDF. Click generate. It's going to give you a pop-up, and in it will be all of your enrollments. There are none because this is a new calendar in the test site, but it'll have all the enrollments and those fields that you've selected in your report. From there, you can look to see, for example, if you've got some 12th graders in your enrollment detail report that you know were summer graduates, then you can go to that specific student and modify the enrollment, which I'll show you how to do in a second. If you've got a bird's eye view of students and you know by name some of them that have transferred over the summer, you can look for them in the enrollment, go to their name, and change their enrollment information there as well. So it's a handy way to have a bird's eye view of what your current enrollments are. And you can do this at any time, at any point of the year. So jumping into changing the enrollments. So for those students that transferred over summer, or if you have students whose whereabouts are unknown, you need to adjust those enrollments. So presumably you have rolled students forward into the 21-22 calendar. Some of those students may not need that enrollment. You know, maybe you don't know where they're at. Maybe they transfer over to the summer. So for grades PK to 6 that do not return, because certain grades are done differently, inside the current year, that enrollment should be deleted. The student did not attend class at all this year so far. if the student attended one day of class this year, leave it in there. But if that student did not attend class yet and you don't know where they're at, or if you know they're transferred for PK to sixth grade only, delete that enrollment for this year. Then once you delete the current year enrollment, go to the last year's enrollment and change the end status to reflect the student's current status, be it a transfer status or unknown status. So I'm going to pull up some kids here. Let's see if I've got any in the Monroe High School. Yep. So let's say this kiddo who has a 2022 enrollment transferred over the summer. And let's pretend that this was a sixth grader. So PK through six. I would delete this enrollment. Just click delete. Then I would go to the student's last year enrollment, and then I would modify the end status code to be a transfer out code. Then click save. So that's if a student was in PK to six and, for example, was a transfer student over the summer. If the student was a PK and sixth grader and didn't show up and you don't know where they're at and you've tried to contact the parents, you would delete this enrollment for the new year, go to the previous enrollment for 2021, change that end status to an unknown code, which is 260, unknown grade, and it says grades PK through six. The reason why it says that is because for students that are 7 to 12, we treat them a little differently sometimes. They could be a dropout code instead. So for those PK to 6 students, that's all you need to do. Delete that current year enrollment if they're not coming back, and then change the previous year enrollment for an accurate end status. That's all you have to do there. Now for students that are 7 to 12th grade that do not return and their whereabouts are not known, they do not know where they're at, all attempts to contact the parents or guardians have been exhausted, then a single day enrollment for the current year is required. So let's say that this kiddo in our sample example here, this kiddo hasn't showed up. You don't know where the student is. Don't leave the enrollment hanging here open. After, I think the most standard wait time is 10 days. Every district can decide however that wait period is, but the average is 10 days. After 10 days, if you haven't heard from anyone and you don't know where the student's at, give them the end date of 1 day of enrollment. In this case, it would be that. And then you would give them the local end status. Here we go. Select one of the 300 series of the end statuses. So you're going to scroll down to the 300 codes, and it could be any of these dropouts, but most likely if you don't know where they're at, it's going to be 340 dropout unknown. Then you would click save. That's the current year enrollment. For the 7th to 12th graders, 7th grade to 12th grade, who you do not know their whereabouts. And that's for the current year enrollment. Give them a 1 day enrollment and a 300 series if you don't know where they're at. So then for students in grades 7 to 12 that do not return, and you know that they transferred, you know their whereabouts, parents, guardians have communicated with you that they have transferred over the summer, or you have received notification from a new school that the records transfer has been submitted and you're releasing it to them, you would want to delete that day of enrollment, the enrollment for the current year, just like you did to 6th and 12th, this PK to 6th graders. And then the previous year enrollment should be amended to reflect the transfer status. So you would treat these 7th to 12th graders the same as you would the PK to 6th graders if they're transferred and you know that they transferred. So delete that new year enrollment and then modify the previous year enrollment to have a transfer status. So 3 scenarios there. 2 of them are similar and 1 is different. Okay, jumping into summer graduates. So let's say they're not a transfer, and it isn't that you don't have the whereabouts are unknown. Perhaps it's a summer graduate. So what you would want to do for enrollments for students who completed graduation requirements after the end of the previous year, but prior to the first day of school of the current year, they are counted as graduates from the previous year. So what you want to do is go into your previous year calendar or your high school, whichever one that is, enter that student's name, select go to their enrollment tab, choose the previous year enrollment record, and then change their end status to code 400 graduated, and then click save. And then you'd want to navigate to the graduation tab. So you're going to go to 2 areas. So let's say that this is our student that graduated over the summer. You would not need this enrollment. You could delete that one. And then you would go to last year's enrollment, because they're considered a graduate of the previous year if they graduated over the summer. You would change the status here to 400, which is graduated. Then you'd click save. Then you would navigate to the graduation tab and enter these 3 fields here. The group diploma date, so the date in which they received their diploma, the diploma type, and the diploma period. Then click save. A note about diploma types. Code 04, completed IEP goals, should be selected when a student is graduated through completing their IEP goals, not by completing district graduation credit requirements. The diploma period 03 code, 4 years or with IEP allowing for longer, use that code if the student completes graduation requirements prior to the first day of school of the current year. All right, new enrollments. So new enrollments, there's a few ways to do it. Schools kind of, you just decide how, whatever easiest way for you to manage this is up to you. But using student locator method is what is always required when enrolling students. So the student locator is the preferred method for entering enrollments for students new to the district. So if the student is new in the state, is transferred from a different state and is coming to your school or district, you definitely want to use a student locator for sure, because they need a state ID generated, and that's how it's going to get generated. If the student is transferring to you from a different district within Montana, they probably already have a state ID. However, you still want to use that student locator so you can find them in the system and find a match so that state IDs are not duplicated. So this gives you the information on how to search for a student, if a student is located in the search, and then if a student has never been enrolled in a Montana school. And inside Infinite Campus, I'll show you here under the index. What you'd want to do is go to the school that you're going to enroll that student into. And then you want to go to student information, student locator, enter the last name, first name, and gender of the student. Those 3 elements are necessary for it to work. Click search. It's going to search the entire state database for any matches to that name. Now, if you hover over it, if you have one that's a potential match, but the name isn't quite right, but maybe the birth date is, which can happen if someone spelled the name wrong in a previous district, hover over the name and the previous district will show up that they were last enrolled in. So this student was enrolled in Kalispell Public Schools. So if they're transferring to your district and you know they're from Kalispell, the date of birth is correct and the state ID matches, but the name is probably not identical or misspelled, click on it because it's probably the right student. You'd want to avoid creating a duplicate ID for students. Let's say that none of these are a match though. Then you would hit this gray button here. It says create new student. It's going to warn you saying it's going to create a state ID, which is great. It's going to say pending. When you click save, when you're done, that will no longer be pending. It'll be generated. So currently it's pending because we're in here creating the enrollment. So you're going to enter all the fields that are in red. So get the student's date of birth, put it in there. The federal reporting race ethnicity info. And then in the same area, you can create the enrollment. So select the calendar that you're going to put them into. select the grade, and then the start date, which is always the first day of instruction for them, whichever day that is for that student. And then the start status, if this is a transfer student, you're going to pick one of these transfer codes. If it's a transferred student from different district, then, and if they're not a PK student or kindergarten, then it's probably going to be O2, continued education. But that would be within the same school, so you would want to use that. So if it's a transfer student, you'd want to use a transfer code. If it's like a PK kindergartner and it's their first time ever receiving educational services in your district, in the state, in the student's life, then you're going to use code 01, first time receiving educational services. And then service type. Service types are, what type of enrollment is it? Primary is, like, as it says, it's primary enrollment. The student receives their primary education there, they get their services there. Partial enrollment is for a student, for example, who, let's say this student is enrolled in the 8th grade as a primary enrollment because they are receiving, they go, 6 or 7 classes in the 8th grade. But they also might have an enrollment that you're creating for them for the high school, in which case that would be a partial enrollment because maybe they're taking 1 or 2 math classes or something at the high school. So a student can have a primary and a partial enrollment in the same year, but they can never have 2 primary enrollments in different schools. It won't, it'll create a lot of problems in the system if that happens. So a student can have a primary and a partial, but they cannot have 2 primaries. Generally speaking, your students will have a primary. And special ed services are for students who are enrolled in your school or district who are only receiving special ed services and no other services. That's what the special ed service type is used for. When you get that filled out, click save, and then the student will then have a state ID as well as an enrollment in that calendar that is you've selected for them. So that's if the student was not generated in a match. Let's say you did generate a match and you clicked on the student name. It's going to bring you to the same screen here where you can add this information if it isn't already, and then create the enrollment and click save. So that's what this process is talking about, using the student locator to create enrollments. It's important to note that spelling can be an issue with using any sort of software, essentially. If you don't know a student, if you know that a student has an existing ID, state ID, but you're unable to find it in the student locator, you may need to try different versions or spellings of the name, such as nickname versus full names, like Jonathan versus Johnny, Michael, Mike, Elizabeth, Liz, Beth, Libby, etc. So try different versions before you click that create new student, just to make sure that you are not missing a potential match. There could also be genders that are accidentally entered wrong. It could be the first name or the last name are mixed up. So you'd want to enter and transpose them. So you'd flip them around in the field to search for them. If you need help with that, just call us. We're happy to walk you through that. Service types, I just covered those. Start status and service type fields. Start status codes, see Appendix A. They should reflect that current, they should accurately reflect the current or the last active enrollment of a student so that it is set correctly in the system. See Appendix A for those definitions. And then I have a brief overview of those service types that I mentioned here. Now, file uploads for those Montana Edition users with those templates that I mentioned earlier. So it's suggested that you read through these steps first before performing an upload to make sure you understand the process before jumping into it. There are 2 beginning of the year templates for these districts. There's the student demographic template, and then there's the student enrollment template. The demographic template must be used first. Perform the student demographic file upload before the enrollment file is uploaded. You can't create an enrollment for a student that doesn't exist in the system. The demographic file will create the student's identity in the system first, and then you can proceed with entering the student enrollments using those templates. So this is a lengthy process as far as if your third-party system is not up to date with our templates, which I'll click here to show you. So this is what the template is used for entering the data into a template to get it ready to import it into Infinite Campus. Again, this is for those Montana Edition users only. Your third-party system is provided these templates so that they can modify their system so that you can perform a simple extraction of data that will match that template into a TXT tab delimited file like the one that's sampled here. If you don't know if this is current, if you perform an extraction, student demographic extraction from your system, and it gives you an output like this, use the template to make sure that the rows that are in your extraction match the rows that are in here. So it should have record type starting with SD. It should have a district number, your district number, whatever that is. Your state IDs will only be there if a student already exists in your system and has a state ID already generated from campus. If it's a brand new student you're enrolling for the first time, leave it blank because this demographic template is going to generate that state ID for that student for the first time when it's uploaded. So this may be blank or it may be populated depending on the students that you have. Student local ID is not necessary. It's just an ID that the districts or schools use locally. It's not required, but if you use those, you can put those in there. And then red, of course, is required, last name, first name. These little red arrows give you information on these fields if you need them. Just hover over them. Gender is required, date of birth, and then race, ethnicity info. Put Y for yes or N for no for any of these that are applicable. And then look at this. End of year is always for example, if it's 21-22 school year, this is going to be 2022. It's always the end of whatever school year you're in. So let's say you entered this here. You've got your race, ethnicity info populated, etc. Gender. You've got date of birth. Entered. And you've got a last name and first name. So those fields, if your extraction, this document that your system puts out, if it doesn't match the template, then fill in the template with the data. If it does match, you don't have to use the template. Because then if it matches this perfectly, you should be able to import this extraction directly into campus. If it doesn't match, then you use the template, populate the information, like so. You'll have rows and rows and rows of students. Delete this. You don't need this in here when you're done. Then you delete these first 3 rows and then save this as a tab delimited file, TXT, name it whatever you need it to be named, saved it somewhere you can find it easily. So I always just go to my desktop. Now, if I close this out and I go to my desktop, I will have a white file. It's a text tab delimited file, and all my student data would be in here, line after line. One more thing needs to be in here is the header. So go up behind the SD, click enter, tab your arrow up once, put in HD, hit tab, and then the date of the file extraction. Tab for military, tab once, and then hit enter your military time. Let's just put 10 a.m. Tab one more time. MT9.1 is always going to be at the end of those files. This header is the same no matter what file import you're doing for those Montana Edition users. Only thing that changes is the date and the time, but that header has to be there for the file to import. Click Save, and now your file is ready to import into Infinite Campus. So just to reiterate, the template itself, if you just populate the template and try to upload it, it will not work. The template is there to help you build it into a document like this. This format is what will be imported into Infinite Campus. So this is the step-by-step instructions for doing what I just demonstrated. Once you get that far, you get that file created, what you're going to do is go here to number 5. You're going to go to Index, Montana State Reporting, and then perform an import. So you can go to Index, all the way down to Montana State Reporting, and then Montana Data Upload. Work to perform will be the demographics upload. And you can see there's the enrollment one, which you'll do after you've done the demographic one. Now, first you want to validate and test this file before you upload it. So there's two processes there. Validate and test does not change any data. It tests the file to make sure it's accurate. It's going to look for errors. So validate and test, choose the file that you just created, and then you're going to click Submit to Batch. It's going to pop down here, and it'll say processing. And when the status says completed, it'll say here, get the report. You click on that, and you can look for any errors. If there are any errors, correct them, and then re-upload this, and then do upload file. If the file doesn't have any errors and it looks good, re-upload it and click upload file, and then submit to batch. This will now alter the data and get it entered for you. So just to repeat, sometimes people do validate and test, and then they leave this, they're just like, okay, well, I've done it, I'm done. And they call like, well, I don't have the state IDs, it didn't show up, nothing's working. Well, they just did one part of it. They didn't finish it by actually uploading the file. So come back, upload the file. If something down here in this queue box gets stuck, click your refresh button here, and it will refresh that and change those statuses from being stuck if it happens to get stuck. This same process is repeated then for the student enrollment template. The student enrollment template, like all the other templates, looks similar in its format. However, the information is different that goes in there. For the enrollment, you're going to put EN, which is for enrollment, your district number, the school number, calendar number, student state IDs. Now that you've entered your demographic data, you'll have generated state IDs for those students. Then you would want to populate those into your other system, and then populate them into this template. Service types, start date of first day of school, start status, enter the grade level, and so on. All those fields in red are required. They're going to save it the same way and then perform student enrollment upload. For more information on these upload processes and the templates specifically, go to the OPI AIM website and go to the AIM user guides page. Go to user guides by topic. There's an entire user guide dedicated just for Montana Edition users who have to do these imports. Every single template that is required is detailed in here. How to do everything from creating that header row, how to read the templates, the importance of that header, hovering over small arrows, everything I've gone over is covered in this user guide in depth. Where to perform, the importance of doing a test and then doing an upload. Import types, these are the names of the files and those abbreviations. And then it goes into actual upload process. And then it goes into the specifics for every single template. So the student demographic template, what's in it, field descriptions, how to perform an extraction. So, after I walked you through entering the demographic upload the template. You've uploaded your new students into campus. Now they have state IDs, but well, how do I find them? How do I get them to put them in my system? This user guide has the step-by-step process for extracting those new state IDs. So it's from index, Montana State Reporting, Montana Data Upload. So it's in the same here you go. Montana extracts student demographics, student format. You can pick the school that you just uploaded, choose your format, and click generate extract. It's going to give you a printout or a pop-up window of your new state IDs that you can put into your third-party information system. Then you can proceed with the student enrollment template. So that user guide is broken down in extensive detail on how to do that process. Okay, so you've got demographic data entered, you have your enrollments entered, students have state IDs, you've cleared out any transferred students who needed to have enrollments deleted or changed. Now it's time to verify your data. You want to make sure that after making those changes, the data is looking correct. So just like you looked at that report at the beginning, you can look at the same report to double check everything looks correct. There are other reports you can run, such as the enrollment status report, enrollment summary report, and then that one we looked at earlier, the enrollment summary details report. There are also ad hocs you can run from the state published folder under index. Ad hoc reporting, filter designer, and then there would be a folder in here called state published folder. You would open that up and you would have a list of ad hocs you could run to check data. And then to mention again, the overlap reports. Once you're done entering your enrollments and cleaning them up, run those overlap reports. There's the enrollment overlap report, which is a local one. That's just within your district. Then there's the state overlap report. Run both of them to see if you have any overlapping enrollments. When you've done that, you can do a resync to the state under the index, system administration, data utilities, resync state data. That pushes the data to the state level immediately instead of waiting overnight for a resync to happen. If after you've done that, you still want to look at verification to make sure it's accurate, then you can run this enrollment verification report, the state enrollment verification report, to look at what was just sent to the state to make sure that that's accurate if you want. So that is the beginning of the year verification process. Every school is unique as far as what that will entail. Some will be more in-depth than others, of course, depending on the size. Now, this is the other part of the webinar where I was saying that I was going to jump into these other two user guides pertaining to enrollments for example, Job Corps students or Montana Youth Challenge students. So this guide explains the process for enrolling those students participating in Job Corps, MYC, taking Montana Digital Academy classes, and then also enrolling certain 19, 20-year-old students for inclusion in District A and B count. Again, to reiterate, this guide is going to be useful to you throughout the year, particularly during the fall and spring counts. But it is mentioned here so that way you can create enrollments for these particular students now instead of waiting until the fall or spring count. So this is broken down by program essentially. So there's Montana Youth Challenge Program guidelines, like what qualifies them. Then part A is the enrollment. That's all you got to worry about right now. Follow these simple steps here to create an enrollment. Montana Youth Challenge inclusion for A and B, that's later. This is going to be done during your spring and fall counts under the enrollment tab. So you don't have to worry about that right now. Just create the enrollment for that student. That's all you need to do. Same thing for Job Corps students. Job Corps enrollment, And then later on in the year, we'll go over this, inclusion for A and B. Montana Digital Academy students. This is also helpful, exiting Job Corps students. So whenever a student is leaving Job Corps, this is how you exit them. Exit hours, that'll be coming later in the year. Eligible for A and B 19, 20-year-olds. If they meet these requirements, they are eligible for A and B funding. However, again, that's during the fall and spring count. We don't need to worry about that right now. So this is just to help you get those enrollments good and tidy and set up for those specific students. And then lastly, extracurricular activities. Again, this was just added, and this collection is actually not due until the end of next year, June 30th, 2022, because you're going to be calculating students' participation in extracurricular activities for inclusion, excuse me, who are not publicly enrolled students. This is not required data. This is only if the district decides to participate. And so if you do, first thing to do is decide, does our district or school want to do this? That's the first thing to decide. If you do, then you proceed with creating a calendar specific for these enrollments that are separate from your academic calendars. So all of what I've been doing today is showing you how to create enrollments inside your academic calendars. These are your academic calendars. For these enrollments, you're going to create a separate calendar just for extracurricular activity enrollments. This is the step-by-step process for creating that calendar and renaming it. So you have the name of year 21-22, that's what the XXXX is, and then the name of extracurricular only. So that's a step-by-step process. It's just like creating your other calendars, only there's just less data. So you still go to that calendar wizard inside of system admin, create new calendars by rolling forward selected data, leave the name template as it is, enter number 2, however, in the number field. Normally, when you create your calendar for a school, you enter number 1 in the number field. For these additional calendars, however, you're going to enter a number 2. The start and end date for the calendar is the same as the other calendars. Fiscal start dates of 7/1/2021, 6/30/2022. Click next. You're only going to check the first 5 boxes or so of the data that you want to copy forward. Just those first few boxes is all you need. And it's listed here. Check the attributes, schedule structure, term schedules, grade level, period structures. You don't need anything else to copy forward. The process box will say complete when it's done, and then refresh your calendar, and then verify that the information looks accurate. So we're going to go to system admin. Let's pretend we just created a calendar. What we want to do now is change the name of this to be extracurriculars only. This would say number 2 in it because we just created a new calendar that had number 2 in it, and then click save. You want to check your grade levels, make sure you have the correct grade levels. And then schedule structure should just be the standard main or 1 terms. You don't need quarters. If the data copied forward and gave you quarters, enter your quarter, enter the dates if you want. First start date of quarter, end date of that quarter. But you don't need to have quarters. You can just do full year. Start date, end date. That's all you need in this extracurricular calendar. That's all you need to do, except for one note to make sure that you do with these calendars is, let me go here. That's that now. Okay, here it is. This is important to know. You must have separate enrollments for students who have an academic enrollment. For example, maybe they're in band or choir, and an extracurricular activities enrollment. In order to enter multiple enrollments, the district must create separate calendars, one for academics, one for extracurricular activities. If you have multiple schools with the same grade levels, for example, 2 middle schools, you only need one extracurricular activity calendar for each of those set grades. So for example, your district, District A, has 2 elementary, 2 middle, and 2 high schools. You would only need one calendar created for these extracurricular activities for each of those representative groups. So you only need one elementary one, one middle school one, and one high school. That way you don't have to create extracurricular activity calendars for every single school. You can just group them by grade categories, essentially, if that makes sense. If you need help with this, just call us, we'll help you set it up. So again, this is setting you up for later in the year. Now, students who participate in this enrollment, that information is here. An extracurricular activity is defined as a sport, event, oh, that's a typo, sport or activity, change that. Activity sanctioned by an organization having jurisdiction over interscholastic activities, contests, tournaments, for example, basketball, speech, debate, science, Olympiad, theater, school theater production. The activity has to have approved career and technical student organization, Future Farmers of America, school theater production. So that's what qualifies it as an extracurricular activity. Student participation requirements. Students eligible to participate must meet the following requirements. They have to have a primary enrollment in a non-public or home school. There are some exceptions where some students may be enrolled at a public school with a primary enrollment. If that's the case, they could have an academic enrollment, but it has to only be a primary enrollment. They're taking maybe one math class, but they're homeschooled. So if that homeschool or non-public school student has to have a primary enrollment at their home school, but it is possible that they have a partial enrollment academically if they're taking a single couple classes or something, they qualify, they can participate. The student must reside within the school district where the extracurricular activity is being offered. They also must maintain the same eligibility as required for participation in the activity as a public school student would. So those are the requirements. Now, this is not an extracurricular activity calendar for all of your publicly enrolled students. Again, this is just for non-public, private homeschooled students. They are allowed to participate in extracurricular activities for A and B funding purposes if your district elects to do that. That's what this is about. Again, this is setting you up for a calendar first. You need a calendar in order to create their enrollment. You don't want to enroll them in extracurricular activities in an academic calendar. That'll mess things up. So once that calendar is created, whenever a student comes to you, you can enroll them. It's set to go. And that's what the rest of this user guide is about. Enrolling a non-public homeschool student for participation in that calendar. It's going to tell you to go to that extracurricular only calendar, use the student locator, enroll them, and then you're going to follow these instructions to indicate that they're extracurricular only. So you're going to go to the extracurricular only calendar that you've created, use the student locator, enroll the student in that calendar only. And let's say our sample student here is enrolled in that extracurricular activities calendar. You're going to go to that enrollment and finish the enrollment process here. It's going to be checked, extracurricular activities only. Now watch when I click save. The student marked as extracurricular must have the service type an S partial. So that service type, it will not let you even enroll them if it says primary. All extracurricular activity enrolled students for this purpose, they have to have an S partial service type. So that's detailed in here. Then you're going to click save. That creates the enrollment for that student. Then later on in the year, at the end of the year, for these students, you're going to do this completed extracurricular activities calculation. So number of weeks activities completed at the end of the year process. So again, this user guide, all you need to worry about right now is setting up that calendar. And then if you've got any homeschool students or private school students coming to you for enrollment for activities, you can enroll them at any time throughout the year. That covers this webinar for today. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Our contact information is on the AIM OPI webpage. And you can find this webinar posted tomorrow on the AIM webinars page there. Thank you very much.